say, which may be a mistake sometimes, and a lot of people have corrected me about it. And Barbady is one of them. But my heart is breaking. My heart is breaking. And it's breaking for the people of Japan at this moment, and for the terrible suffering that they're enduring, and will continue to endure. Radiation shows no mercy, and it doesn't discriminate. It takes whoever is in its path, and it transforms their lives in the most terrible way forever. When I first began watching on Friday the unfolding events, and there were a bunch of idiots on MSNBC talking about the fact that what people had to fear most was how afraid they were of nuclear power. And as it unfolded, and they were at first talking about how great the Japanese are, they're really a first-class company and world in terms of country, in terms of dealing with nuclear power. And as it unfolded, and moment by moment, it became clearer that they had lost control of those reactors. Then the story changed. But it was always about trying to make it seem like it was okay. And what happened in Japan is not okay. Not by a long shot. And what happened in Japan does not have to do with that terrible earthquake. It doesn't have to do with that tsunami. It has to do with the fact that that nuke, or those nukes, lost off-site power. And Vermont Yankee could lose off-site power. And Pilgrim could lose off-site power. And Indian Point could lose off-site power. That's not rocket science. What failed in Japan were the backup generators. And when they failed, they created a cascading series of events that led to one excruciating, slow-motion disaster after another, in which one reactor after another, they were unable to put water in and began to melt down. And at this point, there are at least 3 reactors that have had partial core meltdowns, and potentially 2 fuel pools that are melting down. And there may be a third that houses the most radioactive waste that no one's even talking about. I had to go to New York on Friday, and so I couldn't get all the news and pass it on endlessly as I've been doing. And one of the things I began meditating on is, disasters happen, and they happen, but they happen quickly. The earthquake, as terrible as it is, happened quickly. The tsunami happened quickly. But what you see with technology is the most excruciating slow-motion catastrophe unfolding over days, weeks, months, years, in an intolerable fashion, whether it's in the Gulf of Mexico, or it's in Japan, or it happens here. And the reality is that we are not protected from that kind of catastrophe happening here. It wouldn't happen on the same grand scale because there's only one nuclear reactor. They didn't have the money or the hubris to put 6 on the Connecticut River. But in fact, the fuel pool of Vermont Yankee, it's very important to understand, it has way more fuel in it than what is in the Japanese reactors, because in fact they reprocess and move their waste out. So they have about 100 tons, 80 in some of those pools. Vermont Yankee has over 640 tons of high-level waste. That is 75 million curies of cesium, sitting suspended 7 stories in the air outside of containment with a metal roof. And it might as well have a bullseye on it saying, hit me. The Hiroshima bomb had 2,000 curies of cesium. That's to give you a context. The Hiroshima bomb had 2,000 curies of cesium. So when we're talking about 75 million curies, we're talking about a catastrophic situation that is sitting there waiting to happen. and the industry's constant cheerleading about how it could never happen in America because they're so great and we do everything right, unlike now the Japanese that have now been added to Russia as really bad boys. But the reality is then that they haven't met Entergy. And we have. And we know what kind of leaks and lies Entergy engages in and has continued to engage in over a long period of time. And what's really important for us to realize, and it was a real irony, that on the day that this meltdown began, that the NRC, in their wisdom, relicensed Vermont Yankees. But you have to understand something. That's really important in this. Because what the NRC does in this case, it doesn't matter what the NRC does. It doesn't matter what they do. The NRC is in business to keep corporations happy. That's what they're in business to do. And that's why we got Act 160 passed in 2006, because we wanted this to be a states' rights issue. We wanted the people of Vermont to decide what happened in their future. Now, of course, I live across the border in Massachusetts, so I spend all my time up here convincing people in Vermont that democracy is alive and well. You don't know how hard a job that's been. People around here suffered from a lot of despair and disillusion. I had more arguments about whether the Senate would make the historic vote that they did last night, because it was hard to believe that that could happen. But they did. And even though I suffer from radiation without representation, you do not. You do not. And what you have to hold on to is remembering that Act 160 empowers the Vermont legislature to do exactly what it's doing. And what we have to have legislators do with the courage they've shown is hold the line. We need them to hold the line and not let that corporation attempt to undo that vote by saying, well, the vote never took place, or the vote doesn't matter, or now we're going to offer you some groovy deals that in the long run will really screw you over. We have to contact our legislators and we have to make it clear that we want to thank them for holding the line and we want them to continue to do it. And in a certain way, but it's also important to realize, because besides Entergy probably suing in all of this, is that the state will prevail, that Entergy is a bully, and it will use every scare tactic on us and the legislators that they can get away with and say as many lies as they can to try to get their way. And it's not working, and we have to continue to make sure it doesn't. I want to say one more thing, because when this closes next year, and it will close, I'm sorry to say this, but it's not over. Because as much as we would like to walk away, that fuel pool is still 7 stories up in the air, suspended outside of containment. And Entergy, what does Entergy want to do when it closes? Leave it. They want to keep it in the pool with 25 people on site sort of scratching their heads for 30 years. And that is unacceptable. So it's not enough just to close the Mark I. It has to be dealt with. Thank you.